In this activity, we'll be creating a program that utilizes generic functions. Once you're ready, load up Visual Studio Code and we'll get started. Once Visual Studio Code loads, navigate to your Activities directory. We are on Activity 29, so double-click on a29.rs. Once the activity file loads, review the topic and program requirements. Attempt to implement a solution on your own with the video paused. Once completed, resume the video, and I will demonstrate my implementation as well as provide insights to the activity topic. So this topic is about generics and functions. Our program requirements are to create a function that accepts the priority trait as a generic parameter. The function should print out the guest and their current priority level. We want to use the function with at least 2 different guests. We have some notes. The notes indicate that we can use the debug token to print out the information, and we should use the compiler to guide us to the correct generic constraints. So what we'll be doing for this activity is taking this priority trait here, and we'll be creating a function that can operate on it. Specifically, it needs to call the getPriority function, and then it needs to print out some information. The first thing I'm going to do is move this priority trait down near the main function. That way we have the trait available when we write our generic function. I'm going to name our generic function printGuestPriority. It's going to have a generic parameter, and the generic parameter is constrained on the priority trait. For our function parameter, we'll have a guest, and it must be a type T. In the function body, we're just going to utilize the debug tokens as indicated in the instructions. So we'll have the guest is some priority, and we'll pass in a guest, and we'll also pass in the guest priority. To access the priority for the guest, we use the getPriority function that is defined on the trait. So our function has a generic constraint. We have a generic type T, and the T, which is anything, must implement priority. Our guest is a T, it has to implement priority, and our priority trait has a single function, which is getPriority. That function returns a service priority, which is defined up here. The service priority is either high or standard. We can see the priority for an important guest returns a high priority, and the priority for a regular guest returns a standard priority. Both of these also have debug derived, so it should be no problem to print those out. We also see debug is derived on service priority as well, so all of these should be printable to the terminal. Our instructions indicate that we need to also run the function with at least 2 different guests. So I'm going to go back to the main function, and I'll create 2 guests, and we'll try utilizing this function. We'll keep it simple and just have one named guest, and we'll have one named VIP. And VIP will just be an important guest. We'll then call our printGuestPriority function with a guest, and we'll do the same with a VIP. So let's go ahead and run this program and see what happens. To run the program, we'll open up a new terminal. That can be done by going to Terminal, New Terminal. We're on Activity 29, so you'll do cargo run --bin a29. You'll see that we have some errors here. We can see that it indicates that our generic type T doesn't implement debug. And we have our guest, and it says T cannot be formatted using the debug token because it doesn't implement debug. Now, here's something that's interesting. If we look at our generic types, we do see that they implement debug. So guest implements debug, and important guest also implements debug, as well as our service priority. So what's going on here? If we hop back to the terminal, we can see that the compiler offers some help. It tells us to further restrict this trait bound. So it indicates our function here, and it tells us to have a priority trait bound and the standard format debug trait. If we go back to our code, we can add that trait bound to our function. So we'll just add standard format debug. So the issue with our code wasn't that we didn't implement debug on our types, because we know we derived debug for the structure and enumeration. The issue was our function tried to utilize the debug token. However, originally our generic constraint only had a priority, and there's no way for us to know if that priority also implements debug. So if we have our priority plus the debug, we know that our type here must implement both debug and priority. Now that we've added this additional constraint, we should be able to run the program, and it should print out a guest with the proper priority and then a VIP with the proper priority. Let's hop back to a terminal and confirm that this is the case. As we can see, we have guest is standard priority and important guest is high priority. This concludes the activity video on generic functions. I'll see you in the next presentation.